Inside this vault are the remains of those that were massacred by Native Americans in 1780 at Ruddles Station. And it also has the remains of the Lair family. Hey everybody, this is Colonel Carson with Family Tree Nuts, and I'm in rural Harrison County on the Licking River, just across the river from Bourbon County. We're in a very remote spot on the back end of a farm. And by the way, if you like these videos, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and click that little bell so you get notifications to when we post new videos. I've got a very special guest with me today. You want to tell him who you are, sir?
I'm Danny Sanders.
And Danny, you're our local historian, right?
Yes, I grew up about a mile from here, and as a child I used to come down here with my grandfather. We used to fish right here on the river. We're standing right on the bank of the river, in case you didn't see.
And you've taken me on the back of a farm.
Yep.
Who owns the farm?
It's owned by Mr. Darnell.
And we were able to meet with him earlier before we shot this video and gave us a little more insights about it. And the reason we're here is this is the site of the Lair family's house. Charles Lair, right?
Right. In 1812, Charles Lair built a house called the Cedars. Nothing remains of it today, but at the time when he built the house in 1812, it was one of the best houses in Kentucky.
Yeah, and that's why the vault's here now. We're also right down the river, just a couple of miles from Ruddles Fort and where the massacre happened.
Yeah, just probably about 400 yards up the river.
Okay, yeah, on the Lair property.
Right.
And we're right on the banks of the Licking River, right on the cliffside here, aren't we?
Yes, I'm standing right now. I'm standing 25 feet from the water.
Right, absolutely. And we had to drive through a cow pasture in order to get here. You know, the house used to sit right in front here, but now it's full of cows and cow patties, right?
Right, right. Yeah, it's pretty far off the road, but the fort stood right over here behind the vault.
Yeah, and this is a picture right here of the monument, you know, that sits out there where the actual fort stood, just a few hundred yards away.
Yes, yes, and that magnificent house stood right beside it, so right behind us too. Yeah.
Awesome. So let's tell the story about that. So, you know, the story begins, I think it was, 1774, 1775, the Hastings built a fort there. And it was abandoned by 1776 because of all the Native American attacks that were happening in the area. Then the Ruddles group came, used the same structure of the fort, made improvements and things until the summer of 1780 when Captain Byrd, you remember him?
Captain Byrd, yeah. He came down with about a force of 1,000, 1,200 men, you know, they're men and assorted Indians, came down with cannons,
yeah,
and then attacked the fort.
Well, tell that story there. They started at Fort Detroit, went down the, the Maumee River, then went down the Miami River into the Ohio, then down the Licking River. It's an amazing feat to do that because this was really the back country, and they showed up with cannon. Yeah,
they showed up with cannon, 3-pounders, 6-pounders, and showed up at the fort one day and wanted them to surrender.
Yeah, and I think they knew they meant business when they blasted the side of the walls with that cannon. The people in the fort, you know, they had to surrender, and they opened the gates, and everything was just happy then, wasn't it?
So Mr. Ruddle had made a treaty with the commander of the British that they would be taken by the British instead of the Indians. But when they opened the gates up, the Indians come in and took everything that they could get to first.
Yeah, they took Captain Isaac Ruddle's baby and, you know, it threw it into the fire.
Threw it into the fire, yeah. And took it right out of his mother's hands.
Massacred men, women, and children, about 20 people.
Yep.
So, yeah, they massacred the settlers. And we have another video about this occasion when we're at Captain Isaac Ruddle's grave. So you want to check that video out. At the top right there is a link to that video. But they marched them, 400 miles to Fort Detroit, and some of them went even further than that, didn't they?
Yeah, I don't know the name of that place up in Canada, but
Montreal and
300 or 400
Mackinac.
miles on up in there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, from here to Detroit, and then a lot of them even further than that.
And later on, Isaac Ruddle came back here, and that's a whole nother story. You want to check that video, but he came back here and started Ruddle's Mill, which is just down the river here, and he's buried there. But the reason why that story has to do with this story is, on this land right here is where the fort actually stood, the original fort, and where the massacre happened. Then 11 years later, the Lair family moves here to this area. But before we get into that, the story starts out with Matthias Lair, who was born in 1717 on the Rhineland in Germany. Then in 1738, he came on the ship called the Nancy with his future wife. They arrived in Philadelphia in 1738. They lived there for a few years. He married his wife, I believe her name was Cathriana, and then a few years later they settled in the Shenandoah Valley. And that's where the Lair family was reared. They had several children, and we're going to talk about 3 of those children, the 3 boys. They had a son named Andrew. They also had another son named Matthias and another son named John. So the first brother, Andrew, he linked up with somebody pretty famous, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Benjamin Logan.
Benjamin Logan in 1775.
1775, the same year they did Boonesboro. They did Logan's Fort, and Andrew was with Benjamin Logan.
Yeah, they're at modern day Stanford, Kentucky, and there was the raids and things that happened on the settlements here in Kentucky, so he linked up with Benjamin Logan, and they served under somebody else, didn't they?
Yes, George Rogers Clark.
Yeah, the man, right? And what did they do?
They went on an invasion in the Ohio country against the Shawnee.
Wow, yeah, that's pretty amazing. And then I think he settled along the Dix River there, kind of near Danville, Kentucky, and lived there until he died. But 16 years later, his 2 brothers, Matthias and John, they decided to move to Kentucky. And where did they move?
They moved right here, Russ.
Yeah, buddy.
Right here.
And I think that was 1791.
Hang on, Russ. Before that, they were in the Revolutionary War.
What rank was Matthias?
He was a captain.
Well, John was quite a bit younger than him, though. He was a little guy, though. Well, how did he serve in the Revolutionary War?
Well, John told him that he had a wagon. He could be a wagon driver. He just done what he could.
Yeah, he contributed, didn't he? Yeah, most definitely. And after a few years, 1791, they moved to this country.
To right here on the Licking River.
And I think between the 2 brothers, they had quite a bit of acreage right here, didn't they?
I think it was around 2,000 acres.
Wow, that's incredible. I think they bought some of the land from the Hingstons, which Hingston Creek is right here. And then the 2 brothers built cabins. I know Matthias's cabin was a 2-building cabin with a dog trot.
Yeah, it was a double cabin right behind where we are right now.
And then John's was in viewing distance, just a single cabin.
Yes, just right across the river.
And they started on that house immediately. Built in 1791, they called it boscobel, right?
Boscobel.
Boscobel, yeah. Which is still there today.
Yes, sir.
And when that house was built, it was not in Kentucky, it was in Virginia.
Yeah, Kentucky was part of Virginia.
Yeah, so for just one more year, before Kentucky became a state. And we'll talk more about John here in a second, but let's go back to Matthias. Matthias lived, I think, he was about 42 or so, and then I guess his oldest son kind of took leadership, didn't he?
Yes, but Charles still lived here and lived in the double cabin. Of course, he got married in the early 19th century.
Yeah.
And he having children, and their family got too big for the double cabin. So he decided to build a home.
And a home he built, didn't he?
And a home he built. It was called the Cedars. It's set right back here, close to the cabin in the spring. Before he built the home, though, they built a huge barn. The barn was put up in one day.
One day.
One day. He had 500 people come
Wow.
To this place here, and they raised the barn in one day and had it under roof.
And they said they fed them. They had like a big barbecue or something like that. Imagine the food to feed 500 men and probably their wives and stuff that were here too. So that was quite a feast.
Yeah, they were cooking pig and lamb stuff under the ground, and
yeah,
they made the barn without any planes or nails.
Right, because they didn't have any iron, to make the nails right here. So just pegs and things. It was a engineering feat, and I think it was called, wasn't it called a Switzer barn or a Schweitzer barn? Where they built it into a hillside, and
yeah, that's patterned after the barns that they used to build in Germany, and in the northeast in the colonies, where they brought that craft down with them.
Well, there's something unique about that barn too, isn't there?
Yeah, it had a huge front door that was on a pivot log, so a wagon could drive into it and turn around and come back out the other side when it was pivoted.
And it's huge. It was like 45 feet, I guess, one section of it, right?
It must have been to get the horse and wagon in there and turn around without unhooking everything. It had to be a pretty good size.
A revolving door in a barn, pretty neat.
Right.
What a great concept. Unfortunately, the barn's no longer around, but luckily we do have photos of it.
We do. We got photos of the house and the barn, which none of it's here anymore. It's all gone. When I was a child, part of the house was standing here behind us, and I've never realized really what it was. I thought it was an old house, but it was the library of the house. He started the house in 1812. It was finished, in 1828?
1828, yeah.
But it was
a grand house.
A grand house. They called it an architect's wonder.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Something.
And they had lots of money,
They must have had a lot of money, because it cost $40,000 to build it in that time, which would be.
We'd have to look that up. I mean, that would be millions of dollars today,
probably.
In today's money.
Probably, but the barn, the house, they built part of the house. I think the kitchen part first, and they lived in it while they were building the rest of the house. It took them all them years, but what they ended up with was just a beautiful place.
Yeah, and back to that barn a minute ago, we noticed that was started first, and they mustered men for the War of 1812, showed up there to muster out in that barn. And I think he got a hat, and he stood in that big doorway, and Charles held a hat that had a bunch of names in there. What was on them papers?
Yeah, they had slips of paper in the hat, and they would draw to see who was going to go. I guess from the area they had to have so many people volunteer, but they did it by drawing a slip of paper from that hat. So they all draw their slips out. Charles drew one that said he had to go. Charles's brother, who they think was Joseph, he drew one that said he didn't have to go. But he told Charles that he had his family and his farm and everything to do, so he would take his place.
Took his brother's place. That's a pretty admirable thing to do, right?
Yes, sir.
But
he never came back. He got killed in the war, and down around Louisiana somewhere, so that's where they were fighting that war, so they assumed it was him, because they never knew which brother it was.
Yeah.
But he never was married, and that's where he died. Charles Lair never forgave himself.
I can imagine. The rest of his life he thought about that, about his brother that sacrificed himself.
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
So now we're going to shift gears and talk about someone different in the family. We'll come back to Charles here in just a minute, but wanted to bring up Patsy Lair Smizer. Now, Patsy was actually a niece of Charles Lair, and she was the son of Andrew Lair, the one that settled over there around Danville, the one that came to Kentucky first. And there's a story where Andrew's family, they were all sick, and Patsy was the only one that was well enough to go to the mill, and her dad warned her and told her that she needed to make sure that she rested the horse on the way to the mill, because the horse may need its energy on the way back. She went to the mill, got her grain, and was riding the horse back when it was almost night, and a Indian jumped out and grabbed the reins of the horse, and she grabbed a hold of that horse and said, "Go, Billy, go," and got away from the Native American that was trying to attack her there. And that's a neat story about her character, because later she came to visit her family here. She ends up marrying a man by the name of Mr. Smizer. What's the deal with the Smizers?
His name was George Smizer, and he had previously been married to two of Charles's daughters, one before the other that passed away on him. That's just how things happen, and sometimes you died young back in the pioneer days. But anyways, Patsy met George Smizer.
And then George married her, and they said he was a brave man because he married 3 Lair girls.
Yeah, and they, right across the river, they built them a house to try to rival the Cedars.
Yeah, I think he had a unique business, didn't he, George?
George, they would put dams on this river here in front of us, the beaver dams, and they would make fine hats, beaver hats.
Yeah, I think he sold his hats all the way to in Philadelphia at a high dollar. So, fairly wealthy individual.
Yeah, he had quite a bit of money. They also they mined lead over on the property across so he was pretty industrious.
Yeah, right across the river, and I think that they would say, I think when they visited each other, they had a boat that went back and forth, to visit each other. And we're really remote right now, but at the time, this was a main highway right here on the Licking River, wasn't it?
Yeah, you would have your own boat.
and the reason why this was such prime real estate here is that it's right on the Buffalo Trace, that ran through here. So this is an ancient roadbed, and they found some pretty. And the reason we wanted to bring up Patsy is because Patsy had collected a lot of things that she found, didn't she?
Yeah, she did. She had collected mastodon bones.
Wow. Yeah, and the barn, had a collection of odds and ends and things. She was a really smart lady. I think they said she even had a herb garden that was very, used for medicinal purposes and things. So.
Yeah, she would often entertain doctors in the area. They would come to see her, and they either get the herbs from her or learn from her.
Yeah, really neat stuff, isn't it? And before we get too far into the story here about the vault, I wanted to make sure we brought up the story about John. He built his house out of stone. They called it boscobel. Now, there's a story, I think, right early on about Indians attacking.
The story goes that the men were out cutting trees down. Anyway, they heard a horse coming. They looked at it, and it's an Indian. So she gets the rug off the floor. They have a trap door. They go under. She's got a baby. So she's worried to death that the baby's going to, make noise and give her away. So she's under the floor with the Indians above her, tearing the house up, eating everything they can eat.
Yeah, and I think they said they were hooping and hollering, between bites, right?
Right.
So you can imagine the scene.
And she was breastfeeding the baby to keep it quiet.
Yeah. Then when they found nobody, they had their fill and went back off into the forest, and they had trashed the house. So I thought that was a pretty unique story, that our ancestors had to deal with things like that. That, we read that in passing in a book, but think about that. These were real people. These were real people's grandparents and things, and this happened right here.
Yeah, right here. We had all kinds of Indians.
Yeah, no doubt, for sure. So when Matthias and John arrived here in 1791, they owned the land where Ruddles Station stood, and I think the stockade was still there. They had burned down a lot of the fort, but the stockade was there, and they still used that, didn't they?
Yeah, Russ, that's where Charles, they would put the hogs. They used it for a hog pen.
Yeah, absolutely. And right behind there in the rocks.
Yeah, were the bones of 20 of the poor pioneers that died in the fort.
Yeah, so they had gotten those remains and buried them properly for the time being. And wanted to make sure I brought those up before we got further into the story there. So now we'll switch back over here to Charles. Charles was an interesting guy. Didn't you tell me he was an architect, a businessman, a farmer, a scientist?
Yep, a student. He had a room that they made in his library. His library was full of books that, had unusual books in different interests. He would have maps that would come down from the ceilings.
Wow.
He would put cords behind the shutters on the wall and he could pull them and make the maps come down, you know, to save room in the library.
That's pretty neat.
So they could study it on both sides.
Yeah, yeah. It's amazing to think that that was out here in this cow field.
Yeah.
You know, out here in the middle of nowhere, you know, as we would say, kind of thing. I mean, most people haven't even heard of the Lair settlement, you know, but even people that live in Lexington, not too very far away, have never heard of Lair. But it's amazing to think of the technology that they had right here at this spot here.
Right. They inside that house was they had a piano that was built by a couple brothers up in Baysville.
Yeah.
And they were furniture builders, but they built 2 pianos. Charles was lucky enough to get one of them, and it was one of the prized possessions in the house. It had a brass sunburst ornamented.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Over a blue silk background.
Oh, wow.
On the piano.
Oh, wow.
They did have a sunburst out in the yard, sundial. It was a sundial, and it's still in some of the family. I started to ask about that.
Sure. We had brick walkways and things like that. I'm showing you some shots of this cow field right now. This is where it sat, right out here, you know, and there was this big, beautiful home that stood right there. So Charles lived here a very long time. I think he lived to be about 85 years old and died in 1860, but before he died, he had a vision of a family vault. Yeah,
Charles, he was kind of an extraordinary guy. He ambitious type, you know, there wasn't nothing he wouldn't try hardly. They had their own burial plots, but a lot of the caskets and stuff had been dilapidated. They were, you know, falling apart. So Charles went to Maysville and bought iron caskets, and he built this vault to put them in.
I think he blew this out of the side of the hillside with some dynamite.
Yeah, they blew the rocks out, blew one of the workers right into the water.
Blew him right in the river. Can you imagine that?
That's how close we are to the water.
Yeah, and he wasn't hurt, I guess.
No,
just minor.
Got out, and he wasn't hurt. Just dried himself off.
Yeah. So they exhumed the bodies out of the ground, took the bodies out of their old caskets and put them in these iron caskets to put them in here. But I guess there's a story about Charles's mother.
Yeah, they took the old caskets. He'd bought the new caskets. He had everybody standing around. It was like a ceremony. Well, his mother was the first one that they were going to transfer. He opened the casket. He got down and raised her up, and everybody could see her.
Wow, she was like almost normal, right?
Yeah, she looked normal.
She's been dead for 40 years.
Her hair, the ribbons in her hair, her dress, and everybody's trying to, itching closer to see, and all of a sudden she just turned into dust.
Wow!
Right in his arms, you know.
Wow! With the when the body touches the oxygen, you know, they disintegrate. So, and they had a ceremony, you know, brought the bodies down here and put them in this vault right here. Let's go see what's in there. So tell us about what's inside this vault.
The Lair family is buried in here. Charles himself is buried in here. All the bodies to the caskets, they put them in here and put them in the concrete encasements. Also, they got the bones, 20 some odd, I think it's 20 of the remains of the people who were massacred at Ruddles Station.
Yeah. They buried them inside 2 concrete coffins inside there. They brought the bodies in here and put them in these iron caskets, and you could kind of pull them out and look at them and stuff. But what we see now is you see a big wall. And the reason why that wall's there is in 1909.
In 1909, they came down here. They opened it up and they pulled the iron caskets out. They brought a photographer with them and took a picture. They also brought a guy that did cement, and that's why we see those big cement slabs in there. They're in there forever now.
Yeah, we can't get to them, you know, you notice it does have the tablets on there that has all the names and dates of the folks that are buried there.
Yes, and it just sits right on the river. You could go right by it fishing and never see it.
Above the vault it says, "Please do not disturb the remains of the sleeping dead, AD 1845. And it also has, and coming into the gate right there, that says that it was built in 1845. There's two historical things here. There's the vault of the Lair family, but also, like you said, they put the remains of those that died at Ruddles Fort there in 1780. Their remains are here also, so they're not just buried underneath some rocks and things like that. And I think that's pretty cool how we're bringing in two separate history stories into one vault here.
Yeah, and when Charles died in 1860, he left money, and there was a Lair Family Association. Charles wanted to make sure that this place stayed in good shape, you know, for the time, but I guess not many people are going to bother it way out here.
No, nobody's going to bother, and that's why we wanted to bring this to you, because it is such in the middle of nowhere, really, you know. And it's also got a rock wall around on the top, and you and I weren't sure about what that's for, but it may be like the outline of the vault, because this vault was much bigger.
They tried to make a place where, you know, they could hold us, you know, like a funeral service. Put somebody in here, you know. They had their funeral here.
Sure. So the house, the Cedars, stood for ever, didn't it? I mean, it's still here, isn't it?
No, it's gone. The main part of the house burned in 1930.
Yeah. And all that was left was, what, the library and the other L, or in the porch?
The L was left, both wings were left.
You said an L. What's an L? That's E-L-L, or is that E-E-L, or is it E-L-L? What is an L?
L was just a part of the, I guess because if you look at it from the top, it makes an L.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah, it's an architectural term, you're right.
Yeah, it went out and went behind the house. It made an L, and then they had a wing on either side, which was the library on the left, the kitchen was on the right. They had a girls' room, and further back they had a boys' room,
right.
And then they had all kinds of rooms.
And you remember the remains, because I guess that the house burned down in 1930, and you weren't here for that, but
No.
but later on you remember the remaining structures. How long did they stay? They're not here now. We just saw the cow field.
Yeah, they're not here today. I remember coming down here in the 1980s, 1985, 86, because I've always liked the history too, and I come here with my video camera, and I, you know, taped around. But anyway, the library part was standing, and the part that was hooked onto the library was standing. That was the only part I ever seen. It looked like a house to me. That's
Yeah, sure.
Big the wing was. The wing was, I thought it was somebody's house.
And it's completely gone. We've got some pictures of it, but that's all we have of the remains of this.
Yes, it was a architectural miracle. It was one of the finest houses that Kentucky ever had.
Isn't that amazing, you know? And now there's a cow pasture. Moving back over to his brother John, that had boscobel. I think at one time, once he passed away, his son John Wesley took care of that property over there, and they took in a wandering lady at one time, didn't they? She knocked on the door dressed in rags.
She did. The story goes she knocked on the door one night. She didn't have a home. She wanted some food to eat. Well, they fed her out of the kindness of their heart. I guess they felt sorry for her. They gave her a place to stay in a place to make a garden and feed herself, you know. So
gave her some chickens and some stuff.
Yeah, gave her some chickens to raise. The people who worked on the place got to thinking that she could be a witch, you know. So things started happening.
Yeah, she was a little bit. She didn't probably speak to anybody at all, did she?
Nope. And then things would happen, and they'd think, well, it's got to be her, you know. It's got to be the wandering lady.
Right, because a couple cows stopped giving milk, and they saw her milking some milk out of a rag or something. They saw her through her window. So maybe wasn't there a story about some animals and stuff too, or? Some horses?
Some horses that, yeah, they didn't want to, the horses didn't want to walk past her. And they just had she's just strange. Like, we got those kind of people today too.
And that's, I'm glad you said that, is they thought that she might be a witch. She was a weird lady. Today, she might have been a lady with some mental illness.
Yeah, probably. They probably had that back in them days too.
Yeah, and John Wesley stepped in and, put his hand on the back of the horses and said, and they went on by, and supposedly he broke the curse, and, he really tried to calm everything down, and they were good to the lady. And,
yeah, she became part of the family. I guess she lived here until she died.
Yeah, and they buried her in the garden, and I think on her headstone they put
the Wandering Woman.
Wow, didn't even have her name, just the Wandering Woman. It's a neat little side story, isn't it? Another interesting story about John Wesley was when the Emancipation Proclamation was put into effect in 1863, he had to go out and ring the bell, gather his slaves around, and tell them that they were all free.
Yeah, he gathered them all around in the group, and of course, he didn't treat his slaves bad. They were part of the family almost too, And when he gave them the news about their freedom, I think most of them wanted to stay. Only one of them left, right?
Yeah, I think one mulatto girl left. And,
yeah, he told them he would pay them what anybody else got paid for the work they were doing, and that they were free to go if they wanted to, and they were free to stay and work for wages if they wanted to.
I think he told them that he would give them supplies. He gave them stores. They could have any of the furniture that was in the cabins. They could start their new lives. And at the end of the speech...
Yeah, at the very end of the speech, everybody's eyes were wet.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a touching story because, slavery was not a good thing, but we hear these stories and things, but here's a family group, of an owner and their slaves, and the slaves didn't want to leave.
No, they didn't want to leave. Most of them stayed. I think only one left.
Yeah, they stayed here and worked the farm like they always did, but now they got a wage.
Now they got a wage. They got paid for it.
And then John Wesley, a very religious man, and he died on his knees in prayer in 1869.
Yeah, a life well lived.
And then another side story, part of the family there, remember we had the three brothers. We had Andrew, Matthias, and John that left Virginia and came to Kentucky, but one of their sisters stayed back and married a Newman. And they had a son named David Newman who moved to Jessamine County, Kentucky. Not too far from here, but about 60 miles, I guess, in traveling.
Probably.
And he became a successful businessman and a farmer also. And he had a very large house that was called Cedar Grove, not to be confused with the Cedars.
The Cedars.
Because, he named his after all the grove trees that are around there. But just a neat little side story that we wanted to make sure that we added to this story.
But it's interesting that they probably had cedar trees over there too.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But anyway, that's the story of the Lair family. That's a touch of it anyway.
Yeah, so this is pretty neat. I mean, here we are on a vault on the banks of the Licking River in the middle of a cow pasture on the Harrison County side between Harrison and Bourbon County, a place that hardly anybody knows is here unless you're big time into history.
Yeah, in Lair, Kentucky, on Old Lair Road.
Yeah, we don't want to give them the exact address or everybody will be coming here, right? So, absolutely. So just a neat little thing. You saw our video about the massacre at Ruddles Station, at Ruddles Fort, and we don't talk anymore about the bodies that come here, but here's where they ended up in this vault here. Another, 65 years later after the massacre.
Kind enough to give them a good resting place.
Yeah, absolutely. Charles was for sure.
Yeah.
And so, anything else you'd like to add, Danny, before we head out?
No, this is just a place I used to come as a child. I used to camp out across the river. We got there's all kinds of stuff in this area. If you like history, there's the Indian mounds over there. There's old houses everywhere, and there's the Lairs story. So, I hope you enjoyed this story.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for bringing it to us, bringing us here at Family Tree Nuts. We're blessed to be able to have a little part in preserving the legacy and the story of the Lair family and those that were massacred at Ruddles Station.
Thank you, Russ.
So here we are in front of the Lair Family Vault, built in 1845. the final resting place of so many souls. And remember, family tree nuts, let our nuts find the nuts in your family tree.